Welcome everyone. I am Mahenoor Yusuf and I graduated from Harvard Business School in 2016 with a PLDA. I'm also chairing Harvard in Tech Seattle chapter. Harvard in Tech is the official Harvard University-wide alumni group for technology. We hope to further the development of technology through encouraging innovation, providing resources and networks, and promoting technological activity throughout the Harvard community. Today's webinar is getting recorded and will be available at the Harvard in Tech Seattle webpage. We are so honored to have five distinguished panelists joining us today. Our first guest today, Jorge Roberts, a fellow alum, HBS 2007. Jorge is the CEO of Avports, America's most experienced and trusted airport operator and manager at 10 US airports. Jorge's airport management and public-private partnership investment career spans over 13 years. Formerly, he was the co-founding vice president at the Carlisle Airport Group. Jorge is an active thought leader in the aviation industry, including developing the next generation of industry leaders, and is currently a board member of Airports Council International's Latin American and Caribbean region, a member of the President's Advisory Board for New York's Vaughan College of Aeronautics and Technology, and a volunteer for the Airport Minority Advisory Council. Jorge is an active community leader committed to the advancement of youth and empowerment of underrepresented groups, including minorities and women. He founded over 20 years ago in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation World Affairs Council at University of Washington in Seattle. He holds an international airport professional accreditation from the Airport Council International and the ICAO's Airport Management Program, 2 degrees in business and economics from the University of Washington in Seattle, and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Jorge is joining us from Washington, D.C. Next speaker, Harrison Wolf, is a leader in the field of next generation aviation governance with global expertise in safety and risk mitigation strategies, teaching at the University of Southern California. He is currently the director for global aviation at Zipline International, the drone medical logistics company, and best known for scaled operations in Rwanda and Ghana and implementation in the United States. Before joining Zipline, he led the World Economic Forum's unmanned aircraft systems and urban air mobility projects internationally, developing policies and regulatory framework to support fourth industrial revolution approaches to aviation, including the Advanced Drone Operations Toolkit, Principle of the Urban Sky, and the ICAO Humanitarian Guidance for Unmanned Aircraft Systems Operations. Harrison continues to author research on unmanned aircraft systems. Harrison published the first safety textbook for drones entitled Drones Safety Risk Management for the Next Evolution of Flight, as well as being a contributing author in other safety-related drone textbooks. Harrison was named to the drone industry's top 40 experts in safety risk management from Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International in 2018. In his role as an instructor and trainer, he has helped set up over 80 programs from throughout the world. Harrison is joining us from Fort Lauderdale. Our next speaker, Karina Yamamoto, is a Harvard graduate and CEO of Travilous. Travilous is a social travel app that provides a one-stop solution with all the tools and inspiration every avid traveler needs to journal their trips, share their experiences, and create unique itineraries. Karina is joining us from Brussels, Belgium. Our next panelist, Rohit Goyal, is also a Harvard alum, Harvard University 2014 grad, and currently the product intel at Joby Aviation. Rohit is an aerospace engineer focused on building the future of urban aviation. His work to date has been in new entrants in the aviation and surface transportation industry, including commercial drones, air taxis, supersonics, autonomous and connected vehicles. At Harvard, he pursued engineering sciences jointly with MIT in aeronautics and astronautics department. Outside of work, Rohit has a passion for teaching, sports, and travel. Rohit is joining us from Boston. Our final panelist today, Greg Land, serves as global industry leader with global responsibility for aviation hospitality and travel related services industry segment. Prior to joining IBM, he served in leadership roles with American Airlines, Sevre Vendam Hotel Group, and Radius Global Travel Management, spanning a 23-year career across the travel industry. He currently represents IBM on the Open Travel Alliance Board and the World Travel and Tourism Council, and is on the WTTC Global Task Force for Post-COVID Recovery Planning. Greg holds bachelor's degree in computer science and accounting and completed his master's of business administration at Oklahoma State University. He also completed the executive leadership program at the Wharton School of Business. Greg is joining us from New York. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are so honored to have you here. Today's panel discussion is about future of travel. We will explore innovation in travel industry, urban aerial mobility, technology capability of individual flying cars, infrastructure requirements, drones, and more. Since 2018, the number of electric aircraft in development worldwide has increased by 50%. Roughly 200 electric aviation companies are backed by more than $1 billion from investors, whereas a good chunk of these companies are targeting the commercial airline industry. Urban air mobility is getting more attention. Think ride hailing, flying taxis, electric multicopters, and passenger drones that can summon with an app. The global urban air mobility market side is expected to reach 7.9 billion US dollar in 2030. It may sound like a far off dream. The market is still at a nascent stage and is expected to witness the first ray of commercialization by 2023. Despite the inherent challenges with battery technology and aviation regulations at the city, state, and federal level. Some forecasts suggest that within 20 years, electric vertical takeoff and landing, EVTOL, aircraft manufacturers, operators, and infrastructure providers will have a market value of 318 billion US dollar. In the United States, the electric vertical takeoff and landing EVTOL market could be valued at $17.7 billion annually by 2040. On the basis of simulation results and real-world assumptions, Boston Consulting Group research expect leading global metropolises to see benefits by introducing autonomous vehicles. LA, for example, could cut its carbon dioxide emission by 2.7 billion metric tons per year via policies promoting shared autonomous vehicles and curbing private vehicle use. New York could free up the equivalent of about 400 blocks of space currently being used for parking by promoting shared autonomous vehicle. Hong Kong could cut off the time each citizen spends commuting each year by 20 hours if it promoted micromobility. Quite fascinating results. So let's move on to today's discussion with our panelists. We will start with Jorge. What are the innovations in the travel industry that can make us feel safe and more confident to travel during COVID-19?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, and it's exciting to be talking about this topic as we're going through the pandemic and the unintended consequences of that is happening now is that we're in the age of accelerated innovation, and this is forcing our industry to adapt quicker than otherwise we've seen in the past. And I think it's a lot about, people still love to travel. Travel should be fun, and pre-COVID, it started to become not fun. And especially people like me who travel a lot, and a lot of the amenities and were accessible for more the frequent passengers. And now I think we see a lot more of a democratization of the travel experience, and giving that empowerment to the passenger through more information and deciding what kind of journey they want to have. And so we've at Avports, we've created a program called Safe Hands to keep passengers and employees safer. We've identified about 17 steps. I'm going to highlight a few things, and it's just more thinking about, the passenger journey and how when you get to the airport, you right now are able to see a lot of the wait times and do advanced pre-bookings, which allows you to measure the crowdness and avoid being in a crowded space, and have a little more seamless travel. I think over time, we're going to see a lot more use of biometric features. We're already starting to see that being tested at US airports, and other airports outside the US are a little more advanced. People probably used to seeing things like Clear, but we see now TSA kind of adopting that, where we're going to be able to upload as part of the journey pre-travel. You're going to be able to upload kind of your information before you get there, so you don't have to pull out your phone or get a boarding pass, as well as electronic health passport kind of data, advanced home backdrop service options. Currently there's some of those options, but it's still cost prohibitive or not as seamless, and avoid us bringing kind of bags into the terminal, and some making things just a lot more easier as part of your journey. And once you get to that airport, right now you will see like temperature screening, sometimes automated, sometimes by personnel, face covering checks, but we're going to start seeing more of the baggage sanitation kind of devices. And as you get into more of the terminal, you're going to go through the security checkpoint, which pre-COVID, there's already a lot of innovation trying to happen there. But we're going to see, the more use of the baggage scanners, where you're not going to have to take out anything, not even your computer, or undress, take off your shoes, and more of that biometric ID going through that security checkpoint. And hopefully over time, we're going to see like you're just going to walk through kind of, if people remember pre-September 11th, you were able to just walk through all the way to the gate. And that's how it's going to hopefully feel in the future. Once you're in that concourse, right now, there is some use of augmented reality by using more pre-COVID technology like QR scanning codes, where you get more information. Right now, we're testing that, where we give passengers that information of where things have been sanitized, cleaned. But in the future, hopefully, they'll provide more information about the flights, the what's in the stores, what is available for food options. And I think that we're going to see that more. And right now, if you're hungry, you can use pre-booking. And but I think in the future, and it's already being tested, is a lot of the autonomous delivery. And so you're not going to have to interact less with people. And as you head to the restrooms, believe it or not, there's been a lot of innovation before, but I think there's still some room, especially on self-disinfecting and much more touchless interactions that we've seen in the past, and more autonomous kind of cleaning. And once you're already in the aircraft, people are now used to seeing the reports about, enhanced air cleaning and UV cleaning. And but I think that a lot of the tech that you're going to see is a lot more pre-booking and giving you that empowerment of what you want on that flight, and what kind of experience you want to have. Behind the scenes, you see a lot of innovation happening still on building materials, like chairs, surfaces. In the future, they'll require less cleaning and make you feel safer. and the smart infrastructure with building systems that are going to give us a lot more information on what to respond and be able to keep things cleaner, but also improve kind of that passenger experience, but also keep our employees safe. We're using more autonomous and remote functions. And in the end, I think testing and vaccinations are certainly going to help protect, but I think it's going to, the recovery is not going to just be through economic recovery, but it's regaining that passenger trust. And that's what we're kind of trying to do now through some of these measures. And I could talk a little more about what the future could hold. So thank you.
Excellent, Jorge. Greg, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just supplement a little bit of what Jorge said, because I think right now it's all about restoring the traveler's trust to get people to feel comfortable getting back out and traveling. And, airlines, hotels, all the travel providers have been investing in digital transformation for anywhere from 10 to 15 years. But right now they've really prioritized all these new capabilities around restoring traveler trust. One of the things we did to help facilitate this discussion was we created a framework for each of the subsegments of travel: airline, hotel, cruise, car rental, passenger rail. And we broke it down around kind of what type of capabilities they need to look at in a post-COVID world. And we broke it down into the 5 categories of passenger, crew member, facilities, food and beverage, and then operations and supply chain. So you look at a lot of the things that Jorge just mentioned, they all kind of fall into those 5 categories. But of course, the first piece is really focused on making the passenger feel safe, and also the employees and the crew members feeling safe. And I would say the thing that's really floated to the top is he touched on touchless. Touchless capabilities have probably floated to the top of everybody's list of what needs to get done, because as travelers do get back out, and we've done 2 or 3 traveler surveys over the past year, and it's evolved very quickly already, and it'll continue to evolve. But people don't want to do anything that requires them to approach a counter or even touch a kiosk. So to the extent that everything can be done from their mobile device or be attached to some type of biometric identity information, that's the direction everybody's going. And one of the things that we've developed or kind of accelerated the development of this past year is device-to-device communication. So think about, we congregate around a gate at an airport so that we can hear the announcements and see the board, announcement board. But if you had device-to-device push capability between the agent at the gate and the passengers, you could facilitate a lot of that. So we created, through mesh networks, the ability to push Q&A between an agent and a passenger device to device without even needing Wi-Fi capabilities. So you don't need people to congregate around the gate. You can rearrange the furniture. You can change the flow of how passengers move through airports to facilitate better social distancing. And you can be sitting 50 yards away having a beer, until your boarding group is called. So that's probably the biggest one I would say right now, is just touchless. And then of course, digital credentials and how that relates to biometrics. And I'll get into some of the digital credential stuff more later.
Thank you, Greg. Rohit, would you like to add?
I think Jorge and Greg pretty much covered pretty much all aspects of it. The only thing I would say, which basically just kind of doubling down on what both of them said, is the passenger trust and that confidence is the key. And in some ways, the innovation was already happening in the industry, but it wasn't happening as fast on touchless and digital piece, and not just in the US, around the world. Some countries were faster, some were slower, but I think maybe the COVID-19 pandemic has given that opportunity to innovate really fast, to kind of make basically have people travel again in a safe manner. So in some ways, this could, for the industry, at the end of the day, there could be that light, I guess, end of the tunnel, where industry has fast accelerated some of those innovations, which were already happening, where I think it's just presented itself in its worst form, I guess.
Thank you, Rohit. So we'll move on to the next question. Roger.
Hi, Rohit. So we have the next question, which is, what role will air taxi or urban air mobility play in the future of travel? How does the technology capability of individual flying cars or flying drones play in shaping the future of travel? And what is the hardest challenge for air taxi or urban air mobility to becoming mainstream?
Yeah, 100%. So the vision of the whole urban air mobility market is that it wants to alleviate the on-road traffic congestion and basically give back the travel time, or give back the time to people. Like, I mean, all of us actually are calling from some major cities, and we all know how congested our cities are, and it could pretty much take an hour to get from one point to another point, and the distance could just be like a few miles. And it makes sense that to go in third dimensions. Like if you look at how the human race has evolved, basically we started with like one level of houses, and then eventually now we live in buildings because there's only so much space in like a 2D environment. So you need to efficiently use your resources from like, from a city perspective. So that's a good thing, but there's really no space there. So what air taxis or what the UAM world will do, and where my company, Joby Aviation, comes into play, and other air taxi companies, is basically helping that add that third dimension in transportation. And this is something somewhat new. One can argue that there exists today a helicopter service that can take you from one place to another place, but fundamentally the core technology is different. So the aircraft is different. It's electric, first of all, and it's super quiet, and the economics works. So it's definitely not as cost prohibitive from just operating standpoint that a helicopter typically is. And the next part is like, what is the biggest challenge? So biggest challenge to make this happen in my eyes is, after obviously assuming that technology is proven to be safe and effective, is the consumer acceptance. So this is going to be a paradigm shift on how people move around in their cities. So it's not something you and I or anyone is kind of used to traveling to their work or traveling within a city. So it's a different kind of a mode of transportation altogether added. And it would be definitely challenging for people to kind of accept it, and also have some patience with it, because this is going to start as an expensive service. And by the time the technology evolves and there are a few revs put into development of the technology, it's going to remain slightly expensive, and then it becomes like a mass service, like at an UberX price level that anyone can use it. So there has to be some patience from the community there. There has to be obviously, I think that's what I see as the main challenge. And of course, infrastructure is an issue. You don't really have a lot of takeoff landing pads in the cities. And that can support an electric aircraft. They're probably okay for a helicopter, but you need to charge these aircraft. You need to have like high utilities flowing into your what we call as vertiports. So there are some of those challenges that needs to be resolved, but those can be resolved from pure first principle basis. You can actually, there is a solution to those. So that's why I call more like a community acceptance, a public acceptance. That is, the end user is the public. If they don't accept it, then nothing else matters.
Okay. I want to ask Harrison and Jorge if you guys could add to this. I heard acceptance, infrastructure, and cost as three kind of main drivers. Do you have anything more that you could add to this? Maybe start with Harrison.
Sure. So I would agree with a lot of what Rohit said. My perspective comes at the moment from smaller unmanned aircraft, right? Cargo delivery through medium-sized cargo delivery. And I think the greatest challenge that we see is in the governance of these these technologies, and the inability for logistics systems and government oversight to adjust to the new realities of the technology, right? So in this new fourth industrial revolution, we see that the speed, scale, and scope of the changes in aviation, in the same way that autonomous vehicles have these challenges, outpaces the ability to adjust to them from a government perspective. You know, in Rwanda and in Ghana, for example, we've delivered over 100,000 commercial deliveries. And that's life-saving medicines, that's blood, that's even the COVID-19 vaccine in Ghana. And yet in many parts of the more advanced economies, it's impossible to even fly. And so, you know, I think that when we talk about community acceptance, we have to understand that there are many communities, there are many needs, and the more that the closer we are to what people want out of these technologies, the more effectively we'll be able to garner their support and therefore drive and pressure those tasked with overseeing some of these systems that are based on, you know, 100 years of assumption, 100-year-old assumptions on what technology looks like. The more effective long-term we will be. The last thing I'll say is that oftentimes these technologies have greater efficiencies at scale than we even think they might now. In Rwanda, for example, when we achieved at-scale implementation nationally, we found not only that we could save lives through on-demand delivery, but that the entire blood system was made more efficient. You know, they had wastage up to, you know, I think 7%, 6%, and now it's down to 0% simply because doctors don't have to overorder, they don't have any blood wastage, they don't have blood spoilage, they can order the right type of blood for the right person on demand. And I think that we'll begin to see that type of efficiency in both distributed systems for passenger and cargo delivery.
Great.
I think, thanks, Roger. And just to add to what Rohit and Harrison said, just more from the airport operator perspective, we have a lot of experience. We used to manage the heliport in Midtown Manhattan. At one point, we used to manage the Kennedy Space Center. So I have a lot of experience in our team around this area. And we think that where we see one of the biggest bottlenecks is around the ground infrastructure. And as regional airports, we're looking at, you know, the different firms like Rohit's firm and others like Archer, and there's like 10 more that are all kind of racing and all have different standards. So what we see is if there's some common kind of standardization around that ground operations, then we can offer kind of that common use. And what Harrison's talking about, the scalability and making it more ubiquitous, I think that is where we see kind of the opportunity at the moment, at least from, you know, who's going to be operating that infrastructure. And but it's an exciting time. We're super bullish on it. And so I think it's inevitable, and the technology and the money's going to it and the excitement, and there's good momentum. So I think just a matter of time that'll happen. But I think it's gonna, the path forward and immediate is probably around replacing kind of more closer to what the helicopters functionality and maybe if there's going to be some autonomous, but there's still going to be a pilot there, can create that redundancy, right? And that trust that Rohit is talking about. And I think it's going to be a little bit baby steps, but then I think we're going to see kind of incremental adoption too. And people have always been kind of afraid of autonomy. You know, you remember the elevator, people were afraid of going into an elevator that was autonomous and then it spitted people at a different floor, right? And then it took decades to adopt. But I think, you know, that we're all in this together. So I think the momentum is there for it to happen in the future. So.
Perfect. Back to you, Mahenoor.
Excellent. Thank you, Jorge and Roger. So Harrison, how much of the future of travel will be defined by people mobility versus freight? Are the infrastructure requirements for these two modes of travel mostly the same, or is there tension between these modes of travel? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in different places, it'll drive different answers to that question. Again, it kind of goes back to what the needs of society are, what the customer looks like. In Africa, we see a massive need to connect economies to one another, right? You have great separation between logistics hubs. You have entire economies that are untapped and unable to exist or to develop simply because they can't get the right supplies. And so therefore it requires a 3 or 4 day travel into a centralized location to get your raw materials or to get a finished product, right? And so with cargo delivery, you can connect these disparate areas and advance prosperity, advance the local development. But all that does is that drives then income and it drives demand on travel. So I think that it could be sort of two sides of the same coin. Whereas prosperity and connection grows, you'll also need more regional air travel. I think we've seen in China, for example, the largest demand for air routes is regionally and rather than internationally. So it's between hubs within China and within more regional areas. And all of that will be driven by the electrification of propulsion, greater efficiency, an investment in regional transportation, greater autonomy in flights. So I think the technology that we're developing today on small and medium unmanned aircraft is the exact type of infrastructure and technology that's going to be invested in for things like what Rohit is talking about, what Archer, what Joby, what Archer, and a number of others are also thinking about.
Thank you, Harrison. Greg, would you like to add to the discussion?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say Harrison wins for best backdrop. And I want to play with one of those drones when we're done. But yeah, I mean, when you compare the two, people versus freight, it is a lot of the same technology. However, I think they've progressed at different paces. And if you look at, the customer expectation around air travel or even passenger rail or cruise lines, they started investing in the digital transformation around the customer experience almost 15 years ago. And we really didn't see that level of digital transformation put towards freight, cargo, and logistics companies until here just recently. And we collaborated with Maersk about 3 years ago to create TradeLens, which is a blockchain platform to start digitizing all of the processes and documents around freight and cargo. And when you've got an international shipment, and it's got to cross borders, it can sometimes touch 100 different people with all the different steps in the process. And until recently, much of that was not digitized. So I think just some of the basic stuff around digitizing all the elements and putting all of it online has been a recent thing. And it always gets down to the last mile, which is some of what I think Harrison was speaking to. And that last mile is kind of the most important. And a lot of times that's over road and trucks that are very disconnected from the rest of the process as far as being able to tap into digital platforms to be part of that digital supply chain. So when you start adapting drones for that last mile and looking at how that last mile taps into those digital platforms, I think that's when we're going to see the big leaps in process flow and data flow and trackability. And you think about the customer expectation with Amazon. We all expect same day or next day delivery on just about anything. And I know I'm just as guilty of that. And the rest of the cargo and freight world have a lot to catch up there. But in the end, they're both driven by customer experience and customer expectation. And I think that's what's starting to change and starting to drive that, because all the technology's there. And it's just to the points that everybody's made here. It's about adoption, it's about acceptance. But I know just to even launch TradeLens, the blockchain platform across the cargo industry, was a huge leap, and just driving adoption for that and just getting participants to get onboarded. It's been a 2 to 3 year process. So I think the cargo and freight industry has been a little bit slow to adopt a lot of this, but the other aspects of travel had a lot more pressure from the consumer to drive some of the changes, just to kind of to drive the customer experience.
Thank you, Greg. Rohit, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, I think the future of travel would be defined by the value it brings, whatever it could be. It could be to the people, it could be on the freight. On the infrastructure side, we are looking at different types of infrastructure, because one is like for people's mobility, people move more around the urban area. So you're looking for infrastructure in an urban environment. For for freight, you could do with some outside of urban, suburban kind of environments. But I think one good example, I think, which is basically piggybacking on what Harrison was saying, there was a recent use case, an article from Canada, where they were trying to get vaccines out to their indigenous communities, which are non-accessible. They're not accessible by road, by train, by bus. They're only flying communities. And there's just no easy way in harsh winters to get them the supplies or to get them vaccinated. So that's a value. An autonomous drone or drone that can fly beyond visual line of sight can bring in. Then same thing is with, when the pandemic really started in March and April last year, there was a lot of shortages of medical supplies and a lot of shortages of PPEs and all of that. And it was also driven by just the logistics system wasn't ready to get some of these supplies to the doctors and to the hospitals, and which basically the time was of essence. And when you lose time in that kind of pandemic sort of scenario, that can have consequences. So in that kind of scenario, like drones could have been used as well. So it's going to be driven by the value a product brings, value to the people, and that would basically shape how and when what mobility comes in, what freight transportation comes in.
Thank you, Rohit. We will move on to the next question. Roger.
Okay, great. So the question is for Greg. How has COVID-19 challenged the way we think about the transmission of disease and the opportunity to strengthen communities through technology adoption? I've heard that IBM has something called Health Pass. Maybe you can speak to that as well.
Sure. Yeah, we've had epidemics that have impacted travel several times, SARS and H1N1 and Ebola. So, I mean, it's not a new thing, but COVID-19 was such a severe impact globally as a pandemic and so much more contagious that it really kind of accelerated a lot of the work being done around digital credentials, biometrics, and all the technology in that space. And for almost 2 years now, we've been involved with World Travel and Tourism Council in a task force that back then it was called Seamless Traveler Journey, because it was all about leveraging digital ID and biometrics to expedite processes through airports and for check-in and things like that. Lines were getting longer. There was no more real estate involved. When the pandemic hit, we just expanded that to be safe and seamless traveler journey and started expanding the digital credentials to include health credentials. And so if you think about it, early in the pandemic, we had the focus on testing. And so we went out and created an ecosystem of test partners around a blockchain platform. And we built this around blockchain because of the inherent security built into blockchain technology. So first it was about being able to capture and through a token, be able to pass on that somebody had a negative test and they were okay, but doing it in a way that you're not exposing their patient level personal data. And of course, here in the US, that's very much regulated around HIPAA laws, but in other parts of the world, everybody has different requirements. So it's almost on a country by country basis. You have to look at data privacy and security around patient level health data. So what we've done now is we've expanded that to also include vaccine data. So basically what it is it's a digital credential that simply by saying red light, green light, Greg is safe to travel. Greg is safe to get on this airplane, or Greg is safe to get on this cruise ship. And right now, every country has different requirements. Some countries have issued requirements that you have to have a negative COVID test within 72 hours prior to boarding an airplane. Cruise lines are kind of still playing around with protocols. But in December, we published global guidelines for how all of these digital credentials need to be used. So on the digital ID side, there's something called WC3 standards, which are global standards around digital identification. And then from the healthcare side, there's something called FHIR standards, FHIR, and it stands for, I'm going to forget what it stands for, frequent healthcare interactive, something like, I'm going to forget now. but FHIR standards are similar standards around how digital health information is passed between parties. And that was first being used between pharmaceutical companies and healthcare companies. Well, now you bring those two together, and we have those standards coming together to dictate what type of standards we use for how digital health credentials are presented for travel. So as you look at how people are getting back out and traveling now, we finally have countries starting to regulate what these travel requirements will be. And so the CDC put out requirements on January 21st that President Biden signed off on, that all inbound travelers to the US have to present a negative COVID test 72 hours prior to before boarding. And the airline is responsible for capturing that information and retaining it for up to 24 months. So to do that on paper cards doesn't make a lot of sense. So by digitizing that, it makes it a lot easier for an airline to capture that, store it digitally, and just say, yes, Greg had a presentable digital health pass. Not passing information. We don't store any of the patient level health information. The airline or the airport doesn't store any of that information. It's simply an encrypted token that says, here's the address with the original medical or healthcare data source provider where that data sits. We've gone and looked at it. Yes, he has a negative test. He's good to go. Now we've started integrating the vaccine data. We first launched this with the state of New York. We did a pilot 2 weeks ago. It goes into full production this week. And so for residents in the state of New York is subsidizing a digital wallet where all residents in the state of New York can have on their phone their digital credential, whether it's a test result or a vaccine result, and they can show that to enter an airport, Madison Square Garden, Barclays Center, a restaurant, a shopping mall, anything. And then they're rolling out for merchants the Verifier app, where you scan the QR code on somebody's phone to verify, and it just comes back with a red check or a green check that says they're safe to enter. Now, what they're going to do is they're promoting that as the way to reopen the economy for the state of New York. And so they're going to allow restaurants, sports arenas, possibly even Broadway theaters to reopen and go above and beyond those restrictions that have been in place of 25% capacity by allowing people to show that they've been vaccinated or they've had a test in the last 48 to 72 hours. Now, if you think about this, it can also be quite controversial. And so it has to be rolled out in a way that's very data private, but also in a way that there's equitable access for everybody. So you also have to have a way to print this QR code, and it can't just be on a smartphone, or you're discriminating against those people that don't have a smartphone. So you've got to do it in a way that it has equitable access for all. So that's kind of the big thing that's really got momentum right now. Currently, the Department of Transportation and Department of Homeland Security are looking at whether to extend these types of requirements to domestic travel as well. And so as cities and states reopen, as countries reopen, we're also building a platform for Germany and a platform for Denmark, because now a lot of countries are looking at rolling these out for the entire country, like what we've launched for the state of New York. We've also got other states in the US looking at it, but that's going to be the new way of really authenticating your health status. And if you think about it, it's a significant capability just for the resilience of the travel industry going forward. Once we nip this one in the bud with vaccinations and maybe an annual booster or something, there's going to be something else. There's going to be something else that disrupts travel where we need this type of digital capability. And to what Jorge talked about earlier, when you start aligning this with biometric data as well, that's what's then going to allow us to seamlessly walk into an airport, and either with facial recognition or a retina scan, you're going to be cleared for your digital ID, your digital health pass, your visa, your digital passport. Everything's going to be digitized. And with a simple retina scan or facial scan, you're going to be cleared to walk right through, and that's all you're going to have to do. So it's really going to be a big part of the resilience, as well as just streamlining everything in travel going forward.
Wow, this sounds very powerful. I mean, if I just think about going anywhere you want and having all this data and being able to track how trends are happening within the community, whether they're health or
Yeah.
whether there's food problems or any other kinds of issues. I want to go ahead and expand this over to Jorge and Harrison and Karina and see if you guys can give me some of your perspective on how you see this impacting the industry.
Yeah, just I think Greg covered it pretty well, but the only part that I think the big focus there is that part of that he alluded to was the culture and behavioral shift, and it's not just adding technology, throwing it out there, but
Right.
but getting that. Fortunately, as it in the travel industry, or unfortunately, we have a lot of experience dealing with a lot of these communicable diseases, not to the scale of COVID, but SARS, swine flu, Ebola as well. So we were somewhat prepared already, but other regions have been more prepared, like in Asia, and we've been trying to learn a lot more from them. And so I'm just going to leave it to that and let the others add to that.
Okay, Harrison?
Yeah, I think it is a really powerful potential use. I wonder the degree to which society is willing to have their health data at their fingertips, right? We've seen pushback in vaccinations. We've seen all sorts of disinformation campaigns, and to ignore those I think would be foolish, which isn't to say that you are. I'm just, thinking through this challenge. At the World Economic Forum when I was there, they had an initiative called Common Pass, I think, which was a very similar approach, an alignment with airlines and some airports, I think Amsterdam and Montreal, to sort of create this virtual passport, which evolved into a COVID-19 check system. And very quickly, it turned into, it was fodder for sort of like the global elites are trying to steal all your health data. And, it's a challenge. I really hope that it is a fundamental key towards opening up the economy. I'll be ready to have my app with my vaccination and thing ready to go, but I worry that some folks in the world won't.
Okay. Karina, can you add to this conversation, especially for those who are traveling and logging their travel?
Yeah, so I think that what we've been talking so far has had a lot of focus on the companies, but I think that it's also important to shine a light on the consumers, because I believe that technology moves a lot faster than consumer habits. And something very important, while the whole industry is coming together and collaborating to advance technology for this technology to be effectively used, I think that it's going to be very important to involve consumers in the conversation and making sure that their transition into this new world and to those new technologies is smooth, and making sure that the interface is used and the burden of compliance is on the companies and not on the consumers. And yes, that would be my consumer focused insight into this conversation, I guess.
No, and it's a great point, because some of the early pilots that took place using Digital Health Pass back in as early as September, October, there was feedback. People were very uncomfortable showing any of the identifying or patient level data on their mobile device. But even like the gate agents weren't comfortable seeing that information. Even gate agents and security checkpoints, they don't want to even see negative. They just want to know green check mark, Greg's ready to fly. So you've got to keep it very simplified. And that's why the term health pass versus health passport sounds like you're including some granularity to the data that's being displayed. Health pass just means that's literally what it is. It's a pass that says this person is good to travel. And so it is something we've got to be very careful of and make sure that everybody that's seeing that, the agent, the passenger, a hotel employee, anybody that's going to have to look at that it's something that the consumer is very comfortable with. And that's why initially these are going to be voluntary. But we've got to be very careful not to your point, Harrison, not restrict privileges to anybody because they have it or they don't have it. But it's a way to reopen a lot of things where we have restrictions today, and reopen it in a way that's also still healthy and safe for everybody. So, but it's good. It's going to be something that's going to have to move slowly, and we're going to have to really make sure we survey the public and get their feedback on this, because you're right, Karina. It's got to be something that the consumer is comfortable with.
Great.
I agree. Thank you, Greg, and really agree that the consumer must feel comfortable about whatever new technology we are rolling out. Data privacy is a key issue here. So, and our next question will be actually for Karina, our entrepreneur in-house. So can you talk about your journey to launch Travilous? How will sharing travel experiences be different in the future? What role will technology play in shaping tourism? Go ahead, Karina.
Yes, so I have to say that my journey as a travel tech entrepreneur has not been linear. There has been lots of ups and downs, and obviously COVID taking all of us by the surprise wasn't easy. So, you know, on the positive side, you know, pre-COVID, part of our customer discovery and making sure that we have a product market fit, I was able to do a tour around Europe by bike and have a more, you know, one-on-one conversation with travelers all over Europe and to test our MVP. But then on the more, you know, challenging side has been, you know, all the learning challenges that comes with starting up something new, and all the learning challenges that comes with it. But coming back to, you know, coronavirus, and the most immediate concern is that it was really a time for us to reflect and make sure that we were resilient enough to survive the pandemic as a company, but it was also a time to take a step back to make sure that we'll continue to be relevant in the future, as, you know, the coronavirus has changed it, a lot of things for the industry. And at the end of the day, you know, through all of our research, we found out that the coronavirus pandemic actually provided us the perfect timing to enter the market, because not only are travelers seeking to connect with the travel community and to fuel their wanderlust by reliving their past travels, we also believe that there will be a travel spike post-corona, with travel demands much different from the ones in the past, in the sense that instead of going to the most well-known places and seeking the top 10 attractions, travelers will be seeking more niche experiences in less crowded places. And there's no better platform for them to find those unique experiences that are off the beaten path than a peer-to-peer network like Travilous. And this travel trend has actually been confirmed by the latest travel research at Skift Summit earlier this year. And according to their research, the people want to start planning their trips. And they really have this need to have something to look forward to. And they're starting to revisit their bucket list and start planning. And if you look at their engagement in social media and travel websites, you see a great spike in travel content. And that is because people are essentially planning now to travel later. And also, Longwoods has been tracking the latest travel trends in America. And according to their research, 8 in 10 American travelers have travel plans for the next 6 months. And this actually provides us a great insight in terms of recovering from this pandemic and you know, having some sort of initial assurance that travel will come back. But again, it will be much different from the way that we used to do in the past, not only in terms of health checks and making sure that we comply with different stages of the pandemic in different countries. But according to Skift, travelers have also evolved their taste in travel, and they would be looking for more soulful travel. And that means that they are looking to be more immersed in their travel experiences and immersed in their destination. And they're looking to connect with the culture, with the people, and for the future, we need to make sure that, and I believe that there's also a great opportunity here for travel brands to co-create those travel experiences with travelers that goes beyond, just working with influencers, but making those travel experiences much more introspective and deliberate.
Thank you, Karina. Rohit, Greg, would you like to add? Rohit can go first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely haven't done that much research as Karina may have done, but I think one thing that has been pretty clear in the pandemic days is that how much we actually missed traveling, and just like learning more about us as human species. We are like wanderers, so our species will travel, so that's not going away for sure. But yes, there could be some near-term impacts on how we travel, and I think Karina has alluded to those already, like exploring little less crowded places. So there is an opportunity for areas that were not typically in that tourist zone, sort of to really come out and offer that niche experiences that Karina was talking about. Those are, and I'm personally a user of that because I've been traveling, but traveling to like places where probably nobody else goes. So, and we are loving it. So I think that's a near-term trend we can certainly see, and then there will always be those tourist attractions like Eiffel Towers and all that stuff will always be there. But there will be a lot of emergence of very niche traveling, and probably a somewhat people may start to travel slightly differently. They may go for more like meaningful, soulful, as Karina was saying, experiences versus just checking, tick boxing like few sites in a city or something. But again, this is all speculative. I haven't done any research on it. Over to you, Greg.
Sure, thanks, Rohit. Yeah, I mean, that trend has kind of been started even before the pandemic, the whole idea of having experiences, getting off the beaten path, things like that. And as we've seen travelers start coming back, even throughout the pandemic, but even now that there's kind of light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccine, we're of course seeing leisure travel come back first. We've been doing surveys throughout the pandemic on consumer behavior and travel behavior, and we kind of map it out into a phase 1 traveler, a phase 2 traveler, a phase 3 traveler. The phase 1 traveler have been the brand loyalist, the people that are already comfortable getting out there traveling even before the pandemic, the ones that were loyal to certain brands. And it tended to be like the elite loyalty members who were very comfortable and they trusted the brands that they were buying from previously, and they trusted them. So they didn't have to regain those travelers' trust. The trusted relationship was already there at a brand level. But to Karina's point about social networks and social media and the peer-to-peer interaction, that by far is the most trusted information. So I think tools like the one you have, Karina, and others will take on even more importance as travelers research and make their plans for travel, because anything else they see, they feel like it's advertising based and it's there to stimulate demand. And they really want to hear from a traveler who has been there and has done it and see their pictures and not see airbrushed, pictures on a hotel website or a resort website. So it really, and the really smart travel companies are the ones that have started allowing wiki created user generated content themselves. The star ratings don't mean anything anymore from like, the hotel rating companies and things like that. People just don't trust that anymore. So I think the user generated content is what really has the most relevance. And I think any kind of tool that makes that available is going to get, the usership and the adoption. And so even a lot of the hotel and airline companies are now starting to consider allowing user generated content for that very reason, because I think it is much more powerful and much more trusted by the traveler.
Thank you, Greg. So we will move on to the participant submitted question. Harrison already addressed one of the questions submitted by One Tao, so we'll skip that. So this question submitted by Eugene Katsgris. This for urban aerial mobility, really curious how viable this is technically and cost-wise. How soon do you expect we will see new types of urban aerial mobility? And given costs, will these just be niche service for wealthy? This question is for Rohit. Go ahead.
Yeah, the service is definitely viable. And there have been many studies out there. I personally have done quite a few of them. And if you do it from a very first principle basis, there's nothing in the laws of physics that is preventing it. So that the electric aircraft technology is being flown today, is being tested. My company, Joby Aviation, itself has tested thousands of flights. So the electric aircraft technology is definitely out there. And it's not something that has happened just like a few years. It's been under development, this whole electric aircraft technology at NASA for over 2 decades now. So it's been there, it's been tested. It's just like recently, it's just coming up with all the investments, with all the SPACs and going public kind of news is coming up a lot more often. Economically, this will, as any premium product, as any product, like if you, for example, take a company like Tesla, started with a premium brand and then eventually rolled out a more like a mass brand after putting in many cycles of technology innovation. It's expected to follow the similar trend. So it's expected that this whole market will start expensive, like an Uber Black kind of pricing, but eventually with enough scale, with enough high network efficiency, and just also innovation in the battery technology and just the aircraft technology, it is actually possible to bring the cost down to an Uber X level. So that is like something that you and I uses pretty much every day. So that becomes something that is viable from economic standpoint. Now, the last part was mostly around when, and that's always a great question. When will this happen? There are multiple aircraft companies that are going through the certification process of the electric aircraft. And what that means is really that once the FAA certifies these aircraft, they're basically ready to be flown for commercial purposes. And that is already happening. And the expectation is in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be an aircraft that would be certified for such kind of operations. So you can kind of expect to see an electric aircraft flying, in your neighborhood pretty soon, like in this definitely first half of the decade, and then kind of achieving some sort of scale by the end of the decade. And like by scale, I mean like, hundreds of these aircraft flying in a city. I was actually part of Uber Elevate before Joby, and we launched this program called Uber Copter in New York City, which was basically flying you from Manhattan to JFK. It was the first consumer manifestation of how the service would look like. So the market exists today. It's just the technology fundamentally is different, which brings the cost down, and hopefully people accept it more. And it's just not that Wall Street product. It's more like a mass product.
Thank you, Rohit. And next question, quite interesting, is submitted by Samuel Jackson, and I will let Jorge address this. The question is, what will surprise us most about travel in 2025?
I'm hoping that eVTOL, to give a shout to Rohit and his team, doing a great job. But I think beyond 25, hoping that what Greg and Harrison talk about, and Karina too, about this passenger experience and it being seamless and getting back to being fun. I think we're going to see a lot of that. I described that earlier, and Greg too as well on the panel. I think that a lot of these processes that you see that are being done by agents today, those traditional kind of processes will probably be replaced with technology. I think there's still that human element that we want to see at times. And so that some of that might not get replaced. One of the things that we do, I always tell my team and people in the industry, is that we don't know what's going to change, but we know things are going to change. And our industry has been fairly reactive, particularly around security and then these type of events as well. And hopefully we'll be better prepared in 25 for accepting that change and that acceleration. And I think the challenge mainly in the US, and just to finish, in the US airports, is that most of the airports in the US are managed by government authorities. We all know government is just slow to react. It's hard for them to test new technology, which is what we need to do and pilot it. I think it's going to require much more private sector participation, not from just companies like us, but companies like Greg's company, IBM, Joby, and the like. And that's what's going to force that change and enable that change. So much more of these public-private partnerships that we already see in Asia and in Europe and even in Latin America, and that's where the U.S. needs to just kind of pick up, and I think that's going to be forced through private companies, and we're already seeing that from like new airlines that are emerging. They're about to start, like Breeze, who calls itself a technology company, who's going to also transport passengers. So that's very exciting to see those new disruptions, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that coming online from 25 and beyond.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are ready to wrap up now. On behalf of Harvard in Tech Seattle, Roger and I thank you for your time today. Our panelists, Jorge, Rohit, Karina, Harrison, and Greg, thank you. It is a great pleasure to have you as our panelists. It was an informative session and we have learned a lot. To the participants, thank you for joining us today. It is remarkable how significantly all of our lives have changed over the past year. We hope you and your loved ones are staying safe and healthy during COVID-19. We are grateful for the connection and strength of the Harvard alumni community. Thanks to your generosity and support. Hope this webinar will bring in some thought-provoking discussion. If you're interested in learning more, please join us at Harvard in Tech Seattle. Thank you and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.